Well, hello, noswaith dda. In the last video we were looking at Canu Heledd, the Song of Heledd, and we looked at that very famous Welsh poem, Stafell Cynddylan is tywyll heno, Cynddylan's Hall is dark tonight, and we looked at a little bit of the history, and in this session I'm going to be expanding a little on that history and suggesting a narrative, a story that could sit behind many of these Heledd poems. What we have in many ways in Canu Heledd is not so much one long poem, but several poems, some long, some short. Whoever put these poems in the manuscript knew that they all belonged to the same narrative, to the same body of law, to the same history, if you like, and that's why they were set together in the manuscript. It's quite likely also that means that they're also performed together. They're all performed in the voice of Heledd. She is the grieving embodiment of the land in many ways, as we discussed in the last video. And she commemorates many different aspects of life that have been lost as the kingdom was invaded, as that part of Powys at least came under attack. We're going to look at different lines, basically, from different poems in the Canu Heledd cycle of poems. So we've already seen how they're set in 7th century Britain, and we can guess that 7th century Britain in terms of territories looked something like this. We don't have any of the Brythonic kingdoms outlined there because I want you to be paying attention to the early English or Anglo-Saxon and Jute kingdoms, which are all named there. Powys, of course, is in the north-east of Wales. We can imagine that the eastern border of Wales reaches out roughly into the Midlands, and we can see that the rest of the Midlands, to the east of Powys, we have the Kingdom of Mercia, and then the whole of the northeastern side of Britain is made up of the Kingdom of Northumbria. This is roughly around the period of the 8th and 9th and 10th centuries. The borders between these kingdoms would have been very, very fluid. So that's why I'm kind of using this map to represent a general period of a few centuries. These borders would have shifted often. There were many battles, many fights. Different rulers lost their heads, lost their lives. Different lineages invaded and intermarried and so on and so on. But generally speaking, this is how the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms looked towards the end of the first millennium. As far as we know, the Cynddylan character, who is commemorated in the Canu Heledd cycle, was a prince, maybe even a king, of perhaps the whole of Powys, but probably it's more likely that he was king of a small sub-kingdom within the general territory known as Powys. And Cynddylan, being the ruler or the nobleman in charge of defending that territory at least, there could well have been an alliance between the Welsh king of Eastern Powys and the king of Mercia, because we know that there was a combined effort to fight off the kingdom of Northumbria at this time. We know that the kingdom of Gwynedd successfully invaded Northumbria in the first half of the 7th century, and it's quite likely that Powys was also involved in that fight, and that at different times in that struggle they would have had an alliance with Mercia. Now this is significant for us because this alliance may have been built on the basis of a marriage, perhaps the marriage of a Welsh princess to the then King of Mercia. Now, for you history buffs, for those of you who know how nebulous this period is. It wasn't called the Dark Ages for no reason at all. It's very, very difficult to be accurate and specific about the history of this period. A lot of what I'm going to be covering in this session is very speculative, it's very hypothetical. We're not really sure if this is the case, but this type of story would make sense given the poetry that we find in the Canu Heledd, in the Song of Heledd cycle. So, bear this context in mind. We have the kingdom of Powys, roughly in mid Wales, the kingdom of Mercia, and the kingdom of Northumbria. And it's likely that Powys and Mercia, or at least parts of Powys and Mercia, had an alliance so as to fight off incursions from the north, from Northumbria. Coming specifically to the Canu Heledd poetry, we can see that there are several strong hints in the poetry that Heledd, the main character, believes herself to be at fault. She thinks that the conflict in which this part of Powys has been invaded and in which her brother Cynddylan was killed is somehow her fault. That this war arose because of something that she did and said. There are 3 lines in particular in different poems in the cycle that suggest this background story. One of the first is found in a poem which commemorates the falling of Baschurch, or Eglwysau Basa. Baschurch is crumbling tonight. My tongue caused it. It is reddened. Too great is my sorrow. Very evocative image there, suggesting that Heled's tongue is reddened, that is, it's bleeding. Perhaps just metaphorically, it's bleeding because it is the cause of the destruction not only of Baschurch, Eglwysau Basa, but also of this particular territory. It's also the cause of the death of her brother Cynddylan, and the reason why his hall that we looked at in the last video is destroyed, why it's been burnt down. Yeah. She's saying that she is somehow to blame. In another stanza, she says essentially the same thing. This is a poem that commemorates the death of her sister, Freyr. Blessed is Freyr. How painful it is tonight after the loss of family. Because of the misfortune of my tongue, they have been slain. Again, in another stanza from another poem now. I had brothers whom God took from me. My misfortune caused it. They did not gain fame by deception. So they didn't lie to become famous. They were famous because they did actually really perform great deeds. But it was my misfortune which caused God to take these great brothers from her. Jenny Rowland, the editor of these poems, has put forward a really interesting scenario which may explain why Heledd says these things. Heledd could well have been married off to perhaps Mercia in an attempt to bring about peace. We see that there's a precedent for this in the Welsh tradition when we consider the second branch of the Mabinogi. Branwen is married off to the Irish so as to ensure peace between Britain and Ireland. Of course, in that story also, because of something that Branwen communicates, in the story she doesn't say it directly, but she communicates to her brother through a starling, of course. But because of something that Branwen communicates, it brings about war between the two territories which she was supposed to create a peace for through her marriage. Is this what Heledd is referring to? Was she married off, perhaps, in hopes of bringing about peace? And that perhaps she says something, perhaps she boasts about how great and brave and powerful her brother is, and how noble a warrior he is, and how great a king he is, and how there is no one under the sun who is as great or as heroic as my brother Cynddylan. The mistake, of course, being that she says this in the court of a potential enemy, may have taken umbrage and been offended, and to prove Heledd wrong decided to invade the kingdom of Powys and thereby bring about the destruction of Cynddylan, her brother, and his territory. Heled's unfortunate tongue can be explained if, while in the Mercian court, she made a taunting reference to wrongs not fully satisfied by the peace settlement, or an unwise boast about Cynddylan's prowess. It's clear that she was married off to bring about peace, that peace was not fulfilled because she believes she did something wrong, exactly like Branwen in the second branch. We can also see how in the second branch, Branwen is also a sovereignty figure, as Heledd is a sovereignty figure. In many ways, the second branch is the story of the failure to transplant British sovereignty into this new unified kingdom of Britain and Ireland. The second branch suggests in many ways that anybody who attempts to unify both Britain and Ireland as one sovereign nation is having a laugh. It's just not possible. No one's going to stand for it. The British, the early Welsh and the Irish are far too different. They're always going to be at each other's throats. There's always going to be a natural cause of conflict between the two nations. Therefore, the sovereignty figure finds herself in a very difficult and tragic situation. If we're assuming that Heled's story runs in a similar vein, and there's no reason why it couldn't, the sovereignty figure of Powys also finds herself in a very difficult situation that's not really of her making. Like Branwen, she blames herself, but fundamentally, when we read the tragedy of the second branch, it's not Branwen's fault at all. It's the fault of her brother Bendigeidfran. It's the fault of her brother Efnisien. It's the fault of the king of Ireland, Matholwch. It's the fault of the men around her who, for various reasons, can't hold to the peace agreement. They can't hold to this idea of one sovereign territory. Perhaps Heledd experiences a similar situation, where it's really the men who create the destruction. We really catch a glimpse of how sovereignty, or the sovereignty figure, in many ways is held hostage to a particular set of powerful interests, those being the interests of the warrior elite. Now, it's interesting because sovereignty as a political concept now, as a philosophy, sovereignty essentially means an indivisibility. The sovereign individual is indivisible. Their power is whole and complete to themselves. Their power can't be taken away from them and given to someone else. Yeah. In the same way that a sovereign nation is whole and complete, the power of the sovereign nation is indivisible. It cannot be separated from the nation and given to someone else, as in the second branch of the Mabinogi, where the power is handed on to Gwern, the son of Branwen, who should be able to sit on the throne of both Ireland and Britain. Yeah? It doesn't work. Sovereignty is the condition of wholeness. Sovereignty is the condition of being able to act on one's own authority because you're still in possession of it. The irony in the situation that the sovereignty figure in this poetry finds herself in is that even though she is the embodiment of a territory which is meant to be sovereign and united and whole, she comes back to a broken land, a land where the sovereignty has actually been lost. The power has been lost. The indivisibility has been shattered. There is no community of people to maintain the unity of the territory. Yeah? They've all fled to the hills, or they've been married off to the invading force, like Heledd. What this reveals is that there is a great paradox at the heart of the sovereignty figure in these situations. She is evocative and powerful, But in the same moment, because these are tragic tales, these are tragic circumstances, she has also lost her sovereignty. So, in many ways, Canu Heledd isn't just the story of Heledd, a princess, grieving for the loss of a historical territory and the death of her family. It's also evoking the paradoxical nature of sovereignty in a patriarchy, where power is in the hands of a warrior elite of men. The warrior elite determines how the sovereignty is treated and how the sovereignty is used. And of course, the sovereignty is abused. The sovereignty is not respected. The sovereignty is actually beaten and bloodied and bruised and scarred and is wearing rags. Yeah. The sovereignty in many ways has been betrayed by those who have set themselves up to be the guardians or the protectors or the upholders of that sovereignty. So Canu Heledd isn't just about the land commemorating the loss of the people. It's also the land really experiencing the loss of sovereignty. That's not always apparent on the first reading of the Canu Heledd poems. When we read it for the first time, it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, she is the sovereignty, and this is the land expressing its grief for the fallen heroes and the loss of the people and so on and so on. But the story is a little deeper. It's actually about the loss of sovereignty, the breaking of sovereignty, the betrayal of sovereignty in many ways. And I suppose that makes the tragedy all the more profound.